How's it going, guys? Let's talk about food. Have you considered making your own frozen fish food? It's a great way to save money or come up with a custom recipe if you're looking to feed animals with hard-to-find nutritional requirements. So let's first look at how making your own food can save money. Typically, an 8-ounce package of frozen food can range from $10 to $20 at the local fish store. That translates to about $20 to $40 per pound. Unless you're making fish food from something like 100% sea bass and lobster, it would be difficult to find ingredients at the local market that is this expensive. Most seafood is well under this price point. The other factor to consider is that not everything in a package of frozen food is actually fresh seafood. Sometimes there's binders added to affect the consistency of the product as well as added water content. This makes a lot of sense because when you're trying to make a commercial product, it's important to consider shelf life so that stores aren't stuck with a product that goes bad after a week or so. Also, some of the herbivore blends contain terrestrial vegetables like carrots, garlic, broccoli, and I'm sure that these are fine ingredients, but again, consider that you're paying a premium for these ingredients. Having said that, there's something to be said for convenience. 8 ounces of food lasts quite a long time in smaller aquariums, months even depending on how often one feeds. For those hobbyists, it doesn't make a ton of sense to make 10 pounds of food just to save a few dollars. Cost aside, being able to customize the food for your specific tank inhabitants is also an advantage. For example, some fish like copperband butterflies don't do well long-term in home aquariums because they're usually brought in to take care of aptasia, and once they clean a tank, they kind of run out of food sources. It turns out they really like eating a variety of worms. So if you have a butterfly, you could incorporate some different worms into the mix, bloodworms, that sort of thing. In general, it's nice to know exactly what's going into the food and that you're able to use fresh ingredients. When we prepared this batch, we were much less picky. I just wanted to find some low-cost pieces of fish and just use up some shrimp and scallops that I already had in the freezer. So with this in mind, we headed out to the fish market. Not this one though. This is some vacation footage from the Tsukiji fish market in Japan. It's the biggest seafood market in the world. The one here in Akron, Ohio is less impressive than this. But I digress. We like the fish shop downtown because they fly their fish in a few times a week and often have discounted portions that aren't great for a plate, but are perfect to go into a meat grinder. We ended up purchasing some salmon, one other type of fish whose name right now escapes my memory. We got some fish eggs, and as I mentioned before, some frozen shrimp and scallops that we had just sitting in the freezer. If I didn't have these already, we would probably have purchased them fresh from the store as well. Shellfish can be a little bit more expensive, so we tend to use less for the mix. One thing that's pretty obvious so far is that we haven't added things like mysis shrimp or krill or brine shrimp. In the future, I definitely want to incorporate some mysis and krill. They're super healthy for the animals and they can be purchased in bulk online. I'm not as big a fan of brine shrimp because from what I understand, they have almost no nutritional value. The fish were chosen based on price more than anything. The corals aren't really too finicky when it comes to this sort of thing. One thing to note, however, is that fish, especially salmon, can be very oily. When I feed this food, there's definitely a lot of oil on the surface of the water, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it does go away after a day. I wonder if this is like a healthy food source for like the microfauna in the aquarium or not. To turn all this into fish food, we used a 1 horsepower number 22 meat grinder. You can use a blender or a food processor as well for like smaller batches. And in the past, I made the food using a food processor, but I found it to be very messy and slow. The nice thing about a meat grinder is that it processes the food just about as fast as you can feed it down that tube. The thing that takes the longest is just preparing the food before you turn on the machine. One thing I learned from doing a couple batches is I like to feed the food through the machine twice to get the consistency that I want. The first pass is just a little too chunky for my liking. I'm still very much experimenting with different ingredients, and there's plenty of recipes you can find online if you're looking for ideas. I've based this batch largely on what I had laying around and what I could find at the market. In the future, I want to incorporate some ingredients that are harder to find at the market that I would be able to buy in bulk online. So krill especially. This is one of the best sources of an antioxidant called astaxanthin, which gives it a bright orange color. It's actually a superfood that frankly I should incorporate into my own diet. Now that we have the seafood all processed, we spoon it into 3-ounce containers. In the past, we would put them into Ziploc bags and flatten them out, but this time around, we figured what we would need for a single feeding and just prepared that amount into each container. It makes it easier in the morning just to grab a single container and thaw it out for a few minutes, rather than breaking off different sized pieces from a Ziploc bag. The other benefit to using these containers is that they can be washed and used over and over again. Here are some time lapses of coral eating the food we just made. I'm curious how many of you guys out there have made your own frozen food. If you have and would like to share your recipe, post it in the comments below. I'm always looking out for new ideas when it comes to this sort of thing. Thanks for watching, and happy feeding.